Coming up on Aggie Almanac, it was home sweet home to 10 NMSU presidents, a place filled with memories.
A couple of times we had skunks. We were robbed 3 times.
And NMSU is finding ways for New Mexico to benefit more from its fossil fuel resources.
We've never had the ability in the state to really tap into what we've got.
Hi, I'm Gary Worth, and thanks for watching Aggie Almanac. In this week's show, a touch of local history, focusing on the building that served as home to 10 New Mexico State University presidents. Today, we know it as Nason House, and we got a chance to learn more about it from one of the NMSU presidents who lived there.
My wife and I and our family were here for 10 years.
His name is Gerald Thomas, and when he talks about the 10 years he and his wife Jean spent living in this house on the NMSU campus, as he did here at an NMSU Women's Club reception, you can't help but chuckle.
The fire marshal condemned the house while we were living in it, but they never made the corrections till after we moved.
The structure was designed in 1918 by famed architect Henry Trost, and it was built by the Bascom French Company of Las Cruces, specifically to serve as the first on-campus home for the president of what was then known as the New Mexico College of Agriculture and Mechanic Arts. Its first occupant was Austin Kreil, but the 2 NMSU presidents who spent the most time living here were Harry Kent, for 14 years, and Roger Corbett, who spent 15 years in the house, and who was apparently pestered by birds that loved the trees that surrounded the home.
The problem with the trees was, according to Dr. Corbett, it would house a lot of grackles. And on one occasion, Dr. Corbett had his bib and tuck on, and one of the grackles bombed him on the way to a social. So Dr. Corbett got permission to shoot the grackles. And when I came to New Mexico State in 1960, somewhat on the ecology, environmental side, I guess you might say, Dr. Corbett said, "You have permission to shoot those grackles." Well, I can imagine the new president coming to NMSU and shooting birds.
The house is set on a concrete foundation and has a single story on the south side and a double story on the north. The red brick ground floor supports a framed upper story covered by a low asphalt roof with overhanging eaves. What's known as Prairie School architectural features are seen in the horizontal emphasis of the design, created by the variation in building materials, the shape of the roof, and the banded windows. The band of 3 windows on the ground floor at the front of the house has horseshoe arches that are not believed to be part of the original design. An extension added to the front of the house when Dr. Corbett lived here resulted in a 4th front window and some additional space.
And he added this room. He was going to add it larger, but there was a Chinese rain tree right over here, and they didn't want to cut down that tree, so this is why this is the size that it is, and the tree eventually died anyway, but those are the kind of things that happen.
The original cost of the building was $9,560, well over the $8,000 that had been set aside for the project, and at the time, the price tag was the talk of the town.
When Jean and I were here, we had an old alum came to visit us, and he said, "I always wanted to go in that house because the president spent 1/3 of the university's budget building that darned house when they should have been spending the money for something worthwhile." But I noticed in the same year that they spent $12,000 for barns and corrals.
But the house had its defenders, including the late author Tony Hillerman.
Tony Hillerman wrote an editorial in the paper, in the Albuquerque paper, and he said, "I have no doubt that Jean and Gerald Thomas would prefer some small home away from the campus, which would offer the family peace and some privacy. But when the Regents hired Dr. Thomas, part of the job was officially entertaining. Jean Thomas has already earned a reputation as one of New Mexico's most charming hostesses at no cost to the taxpayers. If they want this traditional role properly performed, the Regents must provide the place to do it. If we are wise, we'll build that residence for the future growth and greatness of NMSU in mind.
So the house went up despite the criticism and served its hosting function for more than 60 years. It was a pleasant spot, but Thomas says living on campus had its downsides. For one, several of the household amenities were located in another structure.
Jean had to go outside and always be dressed because you're on campus to go to the washer and dryer and freezer.
Since the property across the street was an undeveloped bosque, there were problems with wild animals.
A couple of times we had skunks. One time one of the physical plant employees grabbed the skunk and put him in the garbage can before the skunk had time to even spray him.
The house was also something of a target for crooks.
We were robbed 3 times while we were in the house, but the culprit turned out to be a physical plant employee. We thought Jose was really a good yard man because he frequently worked on weekends. As it turned out, this was not dedication, but it was his method of scouting out the best time for the break-in.
And there were lots of passers-by that stumbled across the campus house.
And, one evening, as we prepared for a student social, we noticed a young, despondent hitchhiker sitting on the steps out front there. With some coaxing, we were able to determine that she had been abandoned by her friends. She spent 3 nights with us while she gradually and reluctantly revealed the story of her run away from home and her probable pregnancy. Jean finally convinced her to call her parents in Arizona. They were relieved to hear from her. We bought her a ticket on the bus and sent her back to Arizona. And later on, the parents sent us a note of thanks and enclosed the bus fare. We also had a streaker run by when Jean went out one time here.
Those days were not only known for streakers, but for student unrest over civil rights and the Vietnam War. The presidential house was at the center of those controversies, too.
The campus location presented some challenges during the period of student unrest. The most dramatic incident occurred on April 14, 1972, when we were bombed with a Molotov cocktail by a student. He had thrown a bomb on a building on campus. The police caught him and talked to him. He said, "Well, I just threw a bomb on the president's house." So Jean helped them locate the bomb, which never burned, and it would have been really a disaster had it really burned, because this house was very subject to fire at that time.
But Thomas says that was the only serious outbreak of violence until another issue struck campus.
Our students were, for the most part, interested in getting an education. But some are out there looking for issues, and they finally found one when the headlines read, "Regent's Decision Results in Violence." For 4 days we had disturbance on campus. The issue was intervisitation in the dorms. We had to call out the state police. Jess Price, who was the public relations officer for UNM, called Dave Rodwell, who was our public relations man. And Jess Price said, "I don't understand you New Mexico Aggies. You didn't do a damn thing about the Vietnam War or the invasion of Cambodia, but you interfere with your sex life and all hell breaks loose."
Gerald Thomas was the last university president to live in the house. In 1980, a new residence for the university's presidents was completed east of the main campus, near the university golf course. The old home was renovated in 1983 with a gift from Mrs. Charles Nason. In 1987, the house was dedicated to her son, Willoughby Nason, an NMSU graduate student of Latin American history who died unexpectedly in 1979 at the age of 33, before he could complete his master's thesis on Mexican Revolutionary history. It became known as Nason House. With funds donated by Nason's parents, Nason House became home to NMSU's Center for Latin American and Border Studies. The site is an inspiration and a source of scholarships for students interested in studying Latin America. Inside, you'll find offices, meeting space, and a reading room containing a vast collection of books and artifacts concerning Latin America, collected by Willoughby Nason's father, Charles.
This house has a lot of historic value, and we were very pleased when the Nasons decided to donate some materials and some money to name it the Nason House so that it would be preserved and it would serve a valuable function for the university. It is doing that. It's not just the age of the building, it's the fact that it is one of the few president's homes left on campus across the country. It served this purpose well, and I think it should be remembered for that.
Well, as you can see, Gerald Thomas is quite passionate about the old president's residence. He's concerned about it, though. There are plans to build a large arts complex close to where Nason House is located. And Thomas says he wants planners to make sure this historic home won't be forgotten in the process. We'll be right back.
We've never had the ability in the state to really tap into what we've got.
Welcome back. Fossil fuel doesn't have the best reputation at the moment. Despite that, we will no doubt be using fossil fuels for some time to come. And as it turns out, New Mexico has quite a lot of it. Well, that's why NMSU's Arrowhead Center is in the midst of a research project to look into the relationship between the state's energy resources, water, and jobs. The center was awarded a 3-year, $1.2 million grant from the U.S. Department of Energy to conduct the project. New Mexico has the 3rd largest reserves of natural gas in the nation. It's also a large producer of crude oil, coal bed methane, and uranium. But the per capita income in the state is 20% below the national average. The Arrowhead Center study will use students in the newly created Doctorate of Economic Development program at NMSU to see how fossil fuels can benefit the state and what can be done to improve the relationship between energy, water, and the state's economy. Here with us to talk more about the project is Meghan Starbuck. She is an assistant professor of economics at NMSU and the energy economist for this project. And with her is Dr. Jim Peach, also an economics professor and co-director of Arrowhead's Policy Analysis Unit. And he is serving as the principal investigator for the energy project. And welcome to both of you to our program. And I'll start with you, Dr. Peach. I want to get these titles straight. You are the principal investigator of the project, which means?
Which means I'm the person responsible for getting it done.
Which this is a 3-year grant?
It's a 3-year grant, started October the 1st, 2008. So we're just getting rolling on this. It's for about $1.2 million over 3 years. And it links fossil fuel production, economic development, and water in New Mexico. And we're very excited about it. We're busy already on the project. Meghan is also working on it part-time. We have a half-time staff person working on it and 2 graduate students. And that alone keeps us busy on the project.
Right, just managing all that. But we're talking about fossil fuel and the economy and water. Interesting combination. Why those 3 things? Why are we tackling that right now?
When we put the proposal together, jointly, mainly Meghan and I, but some others involved, we wanted to link 3 of the most critical issues in New Mexico. And it's a natural linkage. New Mexico is an energy state. We produce a lot of energy, oil and gas, coal. Historically, we've done a lot of uranium mining. And yet, despite all of the energy resources and energy production and activity, New Mexico remains, as you know, a relatively poor state. So economic development and linking that to the energy resources and energy production that are in the state is really important. Water.
Yes.
Water is critical also for economic development, but it is also the case that producing energy requires some water, and also if you're drilling for oil and gas, you produce water along with the oil and gas. And produced water is a major issue. Yes, you do. About a ratio of about 6 to 1. 6 gallons of water for each gallon of oil you get out of the ground. And you have to do something with that.
What do we normally do with that?
Put it in a pond next to the rig. And it's a very controversial issue in the state because 2 or 3 years ago the state issued what are known as pit rules that require the lining of those ponds where the water goes. And the oil and gas industry faces additional costs because of that, and they're not too pleased with it. Some other states that are energy states don't require that. So it's a very contentious issue in the state. But the other linkage is that it also takes energy to get good clean water to where people want to use it. Mm-hmm. And you can think of anything from a diesel pump on a well to what the city has to do to distribute water in an urban area.
Okay.
So it may seem like an odd combination of fossil fuels, economic development,
it does.
and water, but in fact it is not. Those three are linked naturally. They are each on their own is an important issue, but I don't think anybody's ever tried to link the three of them together.
Mm-hmm. It did look like an unusual combination. So you might get some interesting things coming out of this.
You bet.
Dr. Starbuck, you are the energy economist, so
Mm-hmm.
what's your role going to be in this project?
Well, my role is to look at and provide additional economic analysis for the things that Dr. Peach just spoke about in terms of looking at how water and energy in New Mexico are related, specifically looking at how New Mexico can really use the fossil fuel resources we have to better promote economic development in the state and what some of the economic implications of being a resource producing state are. We have large portions of the state that the economies in those areas are dependent upon fossil fuel extraction, and they tend to be really hard hit when prices go down, and the current volatility that we've seen in the past year has been, on the upside was a great thing, and now on the downside those same communities are really hurting. And also looking at some of the tax implications for the state, since so much of state revenues are in fact dependent upon fossil fuels, and this certainly impacts the budget of New Mexico State University, among other things. So those are some of the things that we'll be analyzing and researching and trying to come up with some better answers for how we can better use our resources to promote economic development.
Now, it was interesting to me as I looked at this that we're focusing on fossil fuels
Yes.
when there's all this talk about green energy and renewables, but I guess the fact is we do have a lot of fossil fuel resources
the
here.
bottom line is New Mexico is an energy producing state, and we hope to continue to be an energy producing state, and in the long run we hope to do it from renewable sources such as solar, wind, and biofuels. In particular, algal-based liquid transportation fuels is something that we're heavily researching in this state, and there's a big push for. But that's many years out, and so the question really becomes, how do we maintain a secure, affordable energy supply today while building that bridge to energy independence tomorrow? So just because we may want the dream of green energy, it doesn't mean that we can completely forget about the energy we have today. And so if we have, energy is the lifeblood of any economy, and you have to have affordable, secure energy. New Mexico has some of the largest, has significant reserves of energy, and why not use those while we have them until we can build those bridges to the next generation of fuel?
I wanted to follow up on that. What are our reserves? I know that we rank up there very highly with natural gas.
Right, we have 1/10 of the national natural gas in the nation, about 3.4% of crude oil reserves. And we're basically the 5th largest crude oil producer in the country.
Okay.
So we rank pretty high up there, and we definitely, we produce 2,752 trillion BTUs annually, which is about 4% of U.S. energy production. So given that we're a fairly small state population-wise, we contribute significantly to energy production in the United States.
And this, these are resources that are going to be around for a while in terms of how long they'll last.
Right. We have, and I think you can probably address this more, we have significant reserves of resources as well.
The official reserves listed on the Department of Energy Information Administration page say that we have about 700 million barrels of oil. It's probably much larger than that, but even if we have that, we've got a 10 or 11 year supply, even taking that relatively conservative estimate. Reserves are a funny kind of notion. People think there's only so much oil in the ground, but there's an old phrase in the oil industry, there's a lot more oil in the ground at $100 a barrel than there is at 10. Yeah. And technology changes, and we can get a lot more out. We also have significant coal reserves, deposits, and we have, until this year, we had 5 active coal mines. I think it's 4 now, and probably another one coming online to replace the one that was shut down last year. And natural gas, and all of that is very, very significant for the state in terms of income, in terms of state tax revenue. Last year we got over 20% of the total state revenue from taxes on oil and gas.
It was almost 30% of the general fund last year.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, you had mentioned earlier that despite all of these resources, we're not doing that well economically, and what's the reason for that? And I know that's part of the reason for this project.
Well, if you've got a couple of hours, we can begin the discussion.
Okay, well, I don't have a few minutes.
But not only do we have energy resources, New Mexico is home to 2 of the most important technological innovations of the 20th century, the atomic bomb and the personal computer. And yet our per capita income ranks us usually somewhere about 45th or 46th among the states. We've never had the ability in the state to really tap into what we've got. And we've got huge resources, both human capital and natural resources, and the ability to do things, and it hasn't spread to the rest of the economy. There are parts of the state that always do pretty well. There are other parts of the state that do well when energy prices are high. But for the state as a whole, we've got significant areas where economic activity lags tremendously behind national and regional averages.
So how can you see this project addressing that? What do you see that might come out of that?
I don't want to be glib about that, but if we knew the answers when we started, we wouldn't need this project.
Right.
And what we are for a significant part of the project, for example, is to reach out to industry officials, to state officials, to try to find out what they think are the issues that are obstacles to increased production. And we'll have a number of policy papers, a number of conferences, and we will try to make, by the end of the project, collectively, and that involves all of these industry and state people, and as well as the people who are formally assigned to this process, to make some recommendations that might improve things a little bit. And if we can do that, as a demonstration project, there are certainly other energy states that could benefit from this kind of research. Mm-hmm. So although the project focuses on New Mexico, it has wider implications.
Dr. Starbuck, you're also using students in this new graduate PhD program, economic development.
Our doctoral of economic development program.
Yeah, so that plays in pretty nicely for those students. Yes. How will you use them?
Well, we started in October, and we have 2 graduate students that we've been using. And basically the initial, what we want to try to get them to do is to get firsthand experience with data collection, firsthand experience with what to do with that data, how to draw conclusions from it, and help guide them through that sort of research process. And then once we get past that initial stage with them, also begin to use them and help them develop the skills, of, especially within the context of economic development. And exactly the question you asked, why, if we have all these energy resources, why are we not developing economically? What are the linkages between those? How can we expand them and really hopefully provide them with a way to, in the research that they need to do as part of the DED program, give them some firsthand experience and project to help them with their research. So that's what we have planned, sort of.
Now connected to this grant, you've got a conference coming up?
March 19th.
Tell us about that.
It's a one-day conference, and we have a number of speakers from around the state. We have former Senator Domenici coming to give the keynote address and to answer some questions. He's been involved with all three of these issues throughout his career in the Senate. He's very well informed, very knowledgeable, and will attract a good audience for us. And we have a good lineup of other speakers. We have an industry perspective that will be presented by James Manat, who, among other things, used to be a regent at New Mexico State University, but also has run an energy exploration company for a long time. He's going to give an industry perspective. We have Thomas Clifford. Tom is an economist, the research director at the New Mexico Tax Research Institute, and he's done a lot of work on the effects of energy price volatility on state revenues and how to manage that. We've got a good lineup, and at the end of the day, we've got an hour set aside for kind of guided discussion of what the audience thinks are good ideas to pursue in linking these three topics.
Well, public input.
Yes.
And everyone's invited.
Everyone's invited. Right. There will be no charge. There is a pre-registration. And we hope our room that we have reserved is big enough.
Hopefully. Well, Dr. Peach, Dr. Starbuck, we're out of time, but thank you so much for at least that brief introduction to this very interesting project, which I really do hope will help us make better use of our energy resources and really get this state going.
We do too.
Thank you so much. You. Well, it's time now for our amazing Aggie of the Week, when we honor someone on campus involved in something we think is extra special. She's that sort of behind-the-scenes person who does everything, quietly. That's why Cynthia Conine, who works as a program coordinator in the senior assistant to the president's office at NMSU, was nominated as an amazing Aggie.
Cynthia is a leader, an excellent team player, and is a great ambassador for NMSU.
And when it comes to big campus events, Cynthia is there. She was instrumental in the success of the Senator Pete Domenici Legacy Conference held at NMSU in August. Now, if you'd like to nominate an amazing Aggie or have any comment about the show, give us a call at 646-2818 or send an email to aggiealmanac@yahoo.com. And that's our show for this week. I'm Gary Worth. Thanks for watching.